Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Let me introduce to you American director Braden King, who is at this year's Torino Film Festival in competition with his beautiful film, The Evening Hour. Welcome, Braden.
Oh, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. I really appreciate it.
So my first question is, when did you first read Carter Siegel's novel, and what made you decide to make a movie of it?
There's a sort of saying in writing that you're supposed to write what you know. You know, that's something I always tell people in film school. You're supposed to explore where you came from because it's so close to you. I've, for whatever reason, always almost operated from the opposite side, where I've always wanted my films to be a kind of expedition and something that took me out in the world and that brought back images that I felt like I hadn't seen before or hadn't been represented before. So, you know, I've made films in the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. I made a film in Armenia, and this part of Appalachia was a part of the United States that I honestly didn't know very much about when I came across Carter's book. And yet, when I first opened that book and started reading the first few pages, I felt this pull as if the place was already calling, as like, this is where you need to come next. This is the next place that you have to explore. The way that it was a combination of the way that Carter was sort of rendering the geography in the book in the very beautiful and poetic way in which it was being described, and the way in which he had woven the characters that he had written within that landscape felt very unique to me, and the kinds of people they were, and the way in which they interacted, and kind of, it just felt like something very special, and something that was saying, you know, come here, do this. This is what you're supposed to do next.
Our protagonist, Cole, is a very complex character. Can you tell me something about him?
Well, as I was trying to relate a moment ago, and one thing I didn't really answer in your question was when I came across the book, which was about 6 years ago in 2014. One of the things that struck me about the way that Carter had rendered these characters, and specifically the men, was that I felt like there was an exploration of male emotion going on that I felt like I hadn't seen before. A spectrum of male friendships, whether it was Cole's friendship with his friend Reese or his old friend Terry, who comes back to town, and a kind of heartbreak between those men that is hinted at throughout the story and throughout the film. And that felt very special to me, and something that I felt like I hadn't seen in movies or in films, particularly in one set in regions like the rural United States, where so often we're presented with kind of stereotypically macho renderings of what it means to be a man, or what a male friendship might look like. And the way in which Carter's book and Elizabeth's screenplay kind of was interrogating those issues. What is masculinity? What does that mean? What is the spectrum of male friendships? How can you know, what don't we sort of often see or talk about? All of that were things that appealed to me about the book, and that I felt Philip Eninger, who plays Cole, rendered so exquisitely in his performance, so sensitively, and was so open to exploring. That element of exploration that I mentioned in terms of the films, you know, I was speaking in terms of geography, but it also exists in terms of character, story, even within the scene, take to take, when we're shooting it. And Phil was really able to kind of explore very subtle and complex elements of a character like Cole, who isn't all good or all bad, but you know, we all kind of have so many multiplicities within us, and to see someone like Phil, who is so able to kind of flash those at different times and really explore them, to me was just thrilling. And part of that exploration that I tried to mention right at the beginning is like, well, you know, what haven't we seen before? How deep can we go? What can we show that we don't usually get to look at? Were all elements that were very present in all of our minds as we shot this film.
So watching your movie, I felt an incredible sense of place. Which kind of research did you do before shooting? Did you spend time in the community?
Oh yeah, a lot of time. I mean, I tend to work in an almost anthropological way. I do have a background in photography and in nonfiction film, and there are a number of reasons why I feel it's important to spend time, and maybe an unusual amount of time, especially in terms of fiction filmmaking in the community in which we're going to shoot. Something that I feel is incredibly important is, especially with a film like this that is a portrait of a region that doesn't get represented very often. Um, there's a duty to approach that with deep respect and to get it right. This is a part of the United States that hasn't had its story told as well as it should. And the only way I know how to do that is to spend time and to listen. That starts well before we shoot the film, even before the script's finished, traveling through the region, getting to know people, looking and listening. It carries on through the shooting and the collaborations we had with people within the community. We shot in a town called Harlan, Kentucky, that's in the very southeast corner of the state, about 3.5 hours from the nearest airport. A lot of the incidental characters you see in the film are from the community and from the region. Some are actors, some aren't. But listening throughout that process and really being open to the input you're getting was a critical element along the way. And then it extends all the way through post-production. We returned to Harlan before we locked the film for feedback screenings there. In an effort, to me, that's all about just making sure you're making the best film you can, but it's also about being respectful and listening and taking input from the region in which you're working. This is a part of the world that has been exploited in so many ways, specifically in terms of natural resources. You think of the coal being dug out and taking away out of that earth and taken away. And I didn't want to replicate that process with the film we were making. I wanted it to be something where the people with whom we were collaborating and who had welcomed us into their literal and metaphorical homes felt like they were being represented with respect. And that carried through. I think everyone who was involved with this production sort of approached it with the same reverence and desire to collaborate.
The look of your movie is incredible. How did you work to build the look of the movie?
Well, first and foremost, Declan Quinn, my cinematographer, gets a huge amount of the credit for that, and his ability to sort of capture the actual feeling and tone and the smell in the leaves and that landscape in his images. We gave deep consideration to the landscape as a character and to the story that it was telling along the way. And so there almost isn't a frame in the film that's random. I mean, if we're shooting it, it's for a reason, and it's all done with an aim toward allowing the audience to wander through that space, community, landscape in a similar way to the characters. We want them to be able to feel like they can smell the gravel and feel the breeze. And a lot of that takes place in the images. A lot of it takes place in the sound. A lot of it takes place in the actors' performances and the way we compose and weave them into that landscape that I feel is just as critical a part of the story as any other.
So about 10 years have passed since your brilliant debut here. What has changed in you as a filmmaker, and how much has changed the US film industry? Is there more space and support for independent filmmaking?
I think this question of what's changed in me is hard to answer. In some ways, I almost feel like it's not for me to say exactly, but the thing that I can tell you that comes to mind has to do with an intensified, a sort of even more. Let's see if I can say this correctly. I've become more and more committed to process over result, and making sure that, as I mentioned earlier, every aspect of the filmmaking process feels like a true exploration, that we're not starting with the answers, but that we're asking questions at every step along the way and kind of trying to surf along with the universe to create the film that we end up with. To a certain extent, it's not about relinquishing control, but it's about collaboration with everything from the landscape to the community to the actors to my fellow crew members, and trying to make sure that we're all working together and exploring. I'm going to keep using that word, exploring, as deeply as we can. The script and the impulse are a jumping off point, and then you're kind of off at sea, seeing how far you can go and how deep you can go, and how far out on the limb you can kind of get before it breaks. And maybe sometimes it does, and that's okay too. Anyway, for me, it's all about exploration in terms of geography, in terms of performance, in terms of music, all of that. I realize I'm going on a long time. In terms of the film industry, I think these films are always a challenge, and they're always going to be a challenge. I don't think that much has changed in the last 10 years or 8 years since Here was released in theaters, my previous film. But you just have to start, and it requires faith and perseverance and a belief that you're going to find a way in order to bring these stories to the screen and to their audiences. And I don't know how to do it other than just to go and sort of hold on to that faith that, you jump and you hope that there's a place to land, and you kind of figure it out along the way. It's always going to be difficult. If anything, it may have become a little more difficult. We're sort of hit from so many sides, but I do have a lot of faith that if you kind of operate from a place of honesty and truth, and you persevere hard enough, that there is a way to get these stories told, and that you will be able to find it.
Thank you, Brady. And to the audience, this is a beautiful, poetic, mesmeric movie, rich in humanity, and must see it film. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking with you. Thank you.